Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 26th meeting of the Cass Clay Food Commission here on September 11th, 2019. My name is Mike Thorstad, West Fargo City Commissioner and chairperson of this board. Looks like we do not have a quorum, so we won't be taking any action on any items that require a quorum. So unless someone shows up here, we need, I believe, 7 total. So at any rate, you've been presented with the agenda. Is there any changes, revisions, additions, corrections, anything anyone would like to bring forward? Okay, hearing none, we'll just move forward with the agenda as is. Second item is review minutes. We can't take action on it. You should have gotten them. If you have a chance to review them, please do so, and we'll take action at the next meeting or at the point when we get a quorum. Also, announcement here, we do have 2 new members to the steering committee seated over there they got a large crowd over there. We got Kayla Carlson with the NDSU Extension Service, and also Emma Noterman with Clay County Planning. Okay.
She'll be here next time.
Well, we'll welcome her anyway. Good. All right, then we'll head on to item number 2, which is commission check-in. I'm not necessarily running around the board here, but is there anything the commissioners up here would like to bring to people's attention?
Yeah, Horace is having their first farmers market on October 11th. It took a little bit to get us going, but we're going to get one in this year. And we are looking for any type of consumable item, vendors with consumable items to sign up. Vendor spots are free.
Where will that be held at?
It's going to be at the fire hall from 3:30 to 7 in the fire hall parking lot.
Okay, good. Any other?
The Aronia Berry Harvest Festival is this Sunday near, I think it's near Arthur. I just go where the GPS tells me to go.
Okay.
If we're looking for community announcements, I know that next week is Welcoming Week, and there is a group that's organizing an international farmers pop-up market on September 12th. It's going to be starting at 6 p.m. to about 8 p.m., just right in front of the Plains Art Center on the street there. So it'll be a fun time to take in a different market with some new people.
I have one last announcement that we actually, right now, starting at 11 until 1 today, have a pop-up perishable in Dilworth at Access Clinicals for anyone in need of food assistance with fresh produce.
Great. Any other?
Well, farmer's market's doing well in Dilworth.
Good.
We moved it over to the community center now, so
Great.
a little more visible.
Great. Anyone on the steering committee have anything to add at this point? Just that's not on the agenda? Apparently not. Okay, we'll move forward then. On to item number 3, which is single-use packaging materials, brief and snapshot. Noel.
As I'm drinking up my McDonald's.
All right, good morning. We're switching things up apparently with this podium, so glad to get my steps in. So you may remember last time, all the way back in May, we presented 2 items related to the single-use materials. The first item was a 1-page issue brief, just laying out the importance of this topic and some of the data points surrounding it. There were no changes requested for that item. And then Whitney made 3 changes to the community snapshot, which highlights some of the things happening with businesses and organizations in the community. So the first change was on the first page under community education. We added a paragraph about Minn Kota Enviro Services and some of the community education and other efforts that they're doing around promoting recycling in the community. And that was added per Commissioner Curry's request. And the other 2 changes are on the last page under community actions. There were 2 bullet points added in the list under local governments can. The first point was provide consumers with additional recycling education to lessen recycling contamination. And the second additional point was assist local businesses to start as a waste-free, low-waste business or work with existing businesses to move toward that goal. Working with the Chamber of Commerce or the Small Business Association might help in growing such programs. So I know that we're not able to actually approve these documents today, but we did want to share those updates with you. Are there any questions or any additional thoughts on these two documents?
So not to be self-promoting, but I own a zero waste craft soda business in its third year at the Red River Market. If you need any information on how we implemented that or the success or failure of that, I'd be happy to help.
That'd be wonderful, yes. Since we have the opportunity to approve these next time, we'll make sure that that gets added. And if you want to send us a little note about that, or someone from the steering committee can reach out to you.
Right.
Thank you. Anything else?
All right, very good. Thank you for the report, and I guess we'll have a couple months to review this, and certainly you can bring back any adjustments you have to it, and we'll hopefully take action in November.
Great, thank you.
All right, we move on to item number 4, which is a Metro Food Plan update. Mr. Altenberg.
Thank you. Get the presentation set up here. Thanks. We just wanted to provide a brief update of the Metro Food Plan here. We've been able to get some work done on it over the summer, but just kind of taking a step back. Purpose of the plan, there's really 3 main points here. First is to help local governments and community members understand why food systems planning is important. And by that, we mean areas that affect food, health, nutrition, and other economic, environmental contexts. Also looking for this plan to identify food production and food security challenges and opportunities in the areas such as hunger, food access, urban agriculture, and cultural food programs, among others, as well as providing strategic recommendations to guide development of the local and regional food system by both local governments and the Cass Clay Food Partners. Previous plan, as you know, was completed in October 2013. Provided the first framework for understanding local food systems here in the area. This plan put a lot of focus on the different metrics, though, for understanding community wellness, including health indicators, nutrition programs, food infrastructure, and land use. And with that, having a strong emphasis on public health. This plan was adopted by the 2 main entities responsible for public health, Fargo-Cass Public Health and Clay County Public Health. Or, sorry, excuse me, City of Fargo and Clay County, as well as Fargo-Cass Public Health. So with this plan, we're structuring it a little bit differently. One of the main differences is about a year and a half ago, the Cass Clay Food Partners developed several core values, which we've integrated into this plan now. If you want to take a look back, the values that we developed: believing the food system is inclusive, integrated, and equitable, believing in food system that supports and enhances quality of life for all residents, food system that respects all cultures, food system that is economically and ecologically resilient, and a food system that fosters successful entrepreneurship and sustainable innovation. And with those core values, we have identified different case studies that kind of align with those values. So as part of this plan, we are highlighting the Heart and Soul Community Cafe, which has been going on for several years now, the Red River Market, which is in its, I believe, it's in its 4th year this summer. Also highlighting Growing Together, the network of community gardens in the area, as well as the International Potluck that occurs several times throughout the year. The Little Free Gardens that residents and other business owners have put up in the area. And lastly, we are highlighting the Foundation for Agriculture and Rural Resource Management and Sustainability Farms, of which Commissioner Grant has been involved in for several years. We've also develops or looked at some indicators and are hoping to follow some trends here, looking from the previous plan and looking forward. So we've identified a number of indicators. I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically this should help us to see if there are positive indicators with regards to health, food security, food access over the years, or if there's areas that we need to look back and see if there's areas that we need to improve upon as a community. Another quick thing I'll note is public input. Again, we had several pop-up events last summer, and with that we got a number of unique responses from community members. Basically, when we were asking them what food systems issues they'd like to see change over the next 5 years. So incorporating those into the plan as well. And with that, so this plan is going to be geared mainly to the cities and counties in the metro area. And we have 5 overarching goals that we are kind of fitting in some different objectives and some policies as well. So the goals that we've started to work with here as part of this plan updates is creating an inclusive, well-connected food system, providing equitable access to safe, nutritious, affordable, and culturally appropriate food, creating opportunities to achieve a healthy lifestyle and reduce the risk of chronic diseases, promoting self-sufficiency through food skills education and food production opportunities, and lastly, supporting efforts to promote ecological stewardship and resiliency. And under each of these goals, we've started to develop a number of objectives. Again, I won't go through all of these, but these are objectives that we are hoping that the cities and the counties can take a look at and could help to support here in the coming years. So next steps. Before we come back with a final draft, we do want to review this with our local planning partners. So we're going to be reaching out to the planning departments for the cities and counties in the area, just to make sure that they are comfortable with some of the objectives and policies that we start to develop as part of this plan. We also may be reaching out to commissioners as well to get if you would be able to sit in on those meetings as well, that would be great. It might be beneficial to some of the planners here too that maybe aren't as heavily involved in some of the efforts that we've been working on over the years. But with that, we do hope to discuss a draft here at our next Food Commission meeting in November. And then after that point, we'll be going out to each of the jurisdictions to consider adopting as a guiding document for future policies and actions in the community. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Any questions for Adam? Guess not. We'll look forward to the final draft report and take action accordingly then. All right, thank you. Item number 5 is strengthening ties between Cass Clay Food Commission. First Fridays at B. Abby.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm really excited to talk about our the whole outlook of Cass Clay Food Partners and show the commission how we all fit together as a team to promote healthy local foods in our community. So this is probably a review for some of you about our structure, but I wanted to highlight our structure, and what I'll do is talk about the partners overall, talk about the commission, the steering committee, and then actually the action network that is a part of the partners. And then finally, I'll talk about First Fridays at B and how that fits in to the action network. So a little bit about the Cass Clay Food Partners. There are 3 parts to the partners. There's the commission, there's the steering committee, and then there's the action network. And when we reformulated our structure a couple years ago, we were really trying to figure out how to move some of the blueprints and now the snapshots forward into the community as policies or ordinances or things that the the commissioners could do in their jurisdictions to think about some of these really important issues that we've highlighted. So we decided that we really needed some community action around these, snapshots or these issues. And so the Cass Clay Food Action Network was created as a part of the partners. And at that time, too, Megan Meerdahl, who was our past coordinator for the partners, was really moving into working on, her organization, Ugly Food of the North, which is now just Food of the North. And so we decided to create a partnership with Food of the North at that time. So this is, if you don't remember this structure, this is sort of how the commission fits into the overall Cass Clay Food Partners structure. So just a reminder about our mission and our vision. So the mission of the Cass Clay Food Partners is to improve all levels of our community food system to assure that residents have access to safe, nutrition, affordable, and culturally based foods. And you saw that mission come out in the Metropolitan Food Plan that Adam just presented. Our vision is to create the conditions where all members of the community have access to safe, nutritious, affordable, and culturally based foods, obviously coming right out of our mission. So sometimes we need education around those values, and sometimes we need action around those values. So you saw the values that Adam put up, and we decided to integrate these really important values that we took a lot of time to develop into the Metropolitan Food Plan. And I think it's a really broad and overarching set of values that helps us to create action around the food system. So the other thing that didn't come out in Adam's presentation was about how we approach these values as food partners. And so the way we envision the Metropolitan Food Systems Plan coming to life is by these four things. One, encouraging shared leadership through the partnership. Two, engaging citizens and key stakeholders of Cass and Clay counties to take action. And action can be in many different forms. Action can be around programs and volunteerism and events that we create in the community. But action can also be about policies and ordinances and things that actually need to change in our, in our laws, in our separate local laws. And one of the ideas that we had when we formed the commission was really to create these now seven jurisdictions that can come together around similar ideas, and so that one jurisdiction isn't doing something all on its own, that maybe these jurisdictions can work together to create, a healthy, vibrant food system. The third aspect there is fostering teamwork and shared responsibility. And then finally, catalyzing systemic changes through food-related policy and environmental approaches. So that's how we do our work. And the Commission and the Action Network need to work together in order to make that work happen, as well as the steering committee. So just a little bit about what the steering committee does. We are an advisory committee comprised of key government organizations and food system experts working to provide direction to organizations and the management of the food partners. And that includes the Commission and the Action Network. And this is an old list of who's members, so please, I'm sorry about that. I didn't update that slide. And the purpose of the commission, as you know, as commissioners, is to advise policymakers and elected officials in the Fargo-Moorhead metropolitan area on how to assure that residents have access to safe, nutritious, affordable, and culturally based food. And you are voting members of the Food Commission, And actually, there are 7 appointed by the jurisdictions they represent, and we have at-large members as well. So the purpose of the Action Network is to facilitate connections and leverage capacity of partners to increase access to safe, nutritious, affordable, and culturally based food. And we do this with bi-monthly meetings open to any individual or organization, and those meetings happen to be actually the First Friday at Bees, which I will talk about, and they're monthly, not bi-monthly. So let's talk a little bit about Food of the North and where this comes into play in the Action Network. Food of the North has created this great event called First Fridays at Bee, and it's a platform to engage and discuss important food topics in our community. And it's a monthly event co-hosted by Cass Clay Food Partners, which is all of us, and the Food of the North. And this year, we just had our first one take place on the 6th, and the topic was school lunch, because they thought it would be a good idea to kick off the new season with a talk about school lunch and how it impacts our children across the FM area. So the next First Friday at Bees is on October 4th. And I'm not sure what the topic of that is. Do we know? Have you heard? Okay, so food preservation is the next topic. Theater B is located in North Moorhead on the corner of 10th Street North and 2nd Avenue North. It's in the old kindergarten building that was a Moorhead school. It's a great little space. It's a black box theater, and it's a very intimate, close setting to watch theater, but also to have this great event, the First Fridays. So if you've never been to Theater B, it's a fantastic space just to check out. This event, First Friday at Bees, is actually in its 4th season. It's 2 years, but they have a fall and a spring season, so they multiplied that by 2. So it's a 4th season. They had, at the end of the first season, they had 215 unique attendees, which is a pretty amazing number of people coming out to hear about food issues. And it was a really good mix of people from across our community, West Fargo, Fargo-Moorhead, and a good mix of ages, and people come for both personal and professional reasons. So you can go on their website and look at all the different past events that they have. You can even watch the events because they live stream the events on Facebook. And so the last event this summer was June 2019 when they talked about pollinators. And we're going to talk about pollinators today with our special guest, Don Kinsler. So we just some really great talks, and they're real short to the point with questions later. It's an hour-long program that, by golly, goes from 8 to 9, and we're done and out the door, so we can go to work. So this is a call to action then for the commissioners, for all of you to attend those First Fridays at Bee events, because you get a really great understanding and sense of what's happening in the community around food and food systems. And what we also would like you to help us do is before the speakers come up to talk about their topic, there's a series of announcements, which are actually my favorite part of. It's just amazing to hear all the great things that are going on in the community. And so we always have an announcement about our agenda here in the Cass Clay Food Commission's agenda. And we would like one of the commissioners each time to actually do that announcement for our next meeting or what happened at our last meeting, depending on how things line up. And we will pair you with somebody on the steering committee so you will know what to talk about and what to announce. But it's a great way to be connected with not only what's happening, you know, in the commission, but what's happening in the community around food systems, and to meet people and to network and to learn about different issues that are important to people in our action network. And some of the people that go to those 215 unique visitors or attendees to that event, they may not know that they're a part of the Action Network, but they are. They are, if they're interested in food. So I'm sending around a sign-up sheet with the 3 dates for this fall. And if you could please sign up for one date to come. And then we'll also sign up as steering committee members to pair you up. And the steering committee member will reach out to you probably 3 days before the event, just to kind of get you up to speed on what we'll be talking about in our agenda or what was happening. So that's all I have to say about that, and I hope that you sign up. Are there any questions?
I just have a comment to make. As an attendee of the First Fridays at B in the past, I really encourage you, if you haven't been before, to go. I thought last week when you did the announcement and saying to that group that was in there that they're part of the network, like it hit me, like it kind of made me stop for a second. And so I wondered how many of those people that maybe didn't realize that really maybe changed the way that they're thinking about how they're a part of this bigger system of what we're doing and work that we're doing in our community. So I really appreciated hearing that, and I hope other people heard that. But something about the First Fridays that I think is really great is not only do like every time I come out of there, I come out with at least 2 new events that I'm going to attend or that I forgot about that I'm going to go to because I hear the announcements, or I learn something new about what might be going on that affects me, my family, the people I work with, my community. And but one of the key things that I really think it really does that doesn't get highlighted as much is how much it promotes those individuals that are up there on the stage. Like those individuals up there on the stage are coached as to what they can talk about and how to talk about those, and they might not be people that are normally up in front of a big group of people talking. And so there's a lot of care and concern going into those First Fridays of making sure that they're able to share the great work that they're doing and feel really great about it and be noticed by the rest of the community around them. And I just think it's wonderful how it's all put together and stuff. So please go to one of them if you can, because they're fantastic.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yes.
So you said the previous meetings were available on Facebook?
Oh, the previous meetings are actually available on their Food of the North website.
Food of the North. Is that their Facebook page too?
They do have a Facebook page, but I would go right to their website. They have everything housed there. Yeah, and they do, and like Nancy said, the production value of what they're putting together is amazing. And all of the speakers are coached beforehand, and they talk for maybe 5 minutes each, and there's always 3 people up on stage, and then there's a Q&A from the audience after.
If you have a flyer or marketing material, I can put it in our newsletter for Horace.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yep. I think we can just maybe put something about the website there in the newsletter.
Yeah, something that would be a little bit eye-catching.
Okay.
For people that are just flipping through.
Yeah, they have a great logo. I didn't put it up here, did I? This one. This logo is really
Yeah,
great.
that would be great. And then maybe I could do a eye-catching title on it for people, call the people that want to get involved.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? No, thank you very much. Just a comment regarding what Abby spoke on, and of course Adam prior to that, is when we get our information updated. I know you work with our planning departments at the city level, but I'd certainly encourage you when we get updated information to forward that or have that available to our city administrators and stuff. This being a subcommittee of a committee, or, MetroCog, I mean, it's kind of down the line, and I don't know if our administrators understand, what actions or what information is available through this committee. So when we get all that information updated, I want to make sure, besides the planning department, at least in a city like West Fargo, is that our administrators have it as well. I've found in particular, the blueprints come in very handy when you're considering an issue, and that's covered a lot of good issues, so. All right. Moving on to item number 6, approaches to pollinator conservation. Don Kinsler, Cass County Extension, Agriculture and Resources.
Well, good morning. Good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for inviting me. I was tickled to be invited here. And pollinators, what a very important aspect of the food we eat. And, it's fascinating to me, the statistics. About 1 mouthful out of every 3 of food that we eat is directly attributed to the work of pollinators. So about 1/3 of our food supply comes directly as a result of pollinators. And now, if it were not for these pollinators, we wouldn't have most of these foods that we see. What would life be like without a watermelon or a muskmelon or squash? Grapes, so many of these things that we kind of take for granted are directly attributed to the work of pollinators. And boy, wouldn't it, if the world all of a sudden had no pollinators, our food supply would just be devastated. Everything from almonds to squash and many things in between. So when we talk about pollinators, and of course there's been in the media, a lot of attention on pollinators, and that we need to do work to preserve and ensure that we're going to have pollinators so that we continue our food source as we know it. So we hear a lot about pollinators. So what exactly is a pollinator? Well, to understand what a pollinator is, first we need to understand what pollination is, because a pollinator is something that helps pollination. And so pollination is, it occurs in a flower, and pollination is when the pollen, the little yellow pollen grains, get transferred from the male pollen producers onto the female part, and the pollen kind of germinates down into an ovary. And now, if we think of a fruit, the definition of a fruit is a ripened ovary. So now it's interesting. A tomato is a fruit. There's a couple of definitions of whether you call a tomato a fruit or vegetable. Vegetable depending on how you eat it. But anyway, a fruit, a ripened ovary, tomatoes, of course, apples, a squash is botanically a fruit. So an interesting part of botany. Now, if you look at the flower there, the flower contains both the yellow pollen-producing portions, and it also has the female part. And now, in botany, wonderful world of nature, in botany, some plants have flowers that have both parts, male and female pollen, ovaries, all in the same flower. And so that's kind of handy, isn't it? A pollinator just has to work within that same flower. Other types of plants, squash, pumpkins are a good example, cucumbers. Within the same vine, you have male and female flowers separate. And if you take a look carefully at your squash plants, how do you tell the difference between a male and a female flower? Because they're different within the same plant. At the base of a female flower, you've got a little, it looks like a little miniature squash. The male flower at the base of that doesn't. And so bees have to fly from one flower to the other, male to the female flower. So it's interesting. Some things such as tomatoes don't even need a pollinator, but we'll get to that in a minute. So pollination is the transfer of the pollen onto the ovary so it can go on to become a fruit and seed. Now there are really 2 categories of pollination. Okay, one category is where the pollination is helped along or occurs through a live being, animals, humans. So on the left there, we see a bumblebee busy on a clover flower. So pollination can be the result of a living entity. For example, I was a pollinator. When I was going to college at NDSU, I worked in the horticulture department for the squash breeder. And we would take pollen from one flower and we would dust it onto the female portion of another flower to make the controlled crosses. So I was a pollinator. Now, in most cases, when we talk about a pollinator, we're talking about insects, rather than Don Kinsler back in college. So in most cases, pollinators, we talk about the insects. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, though, many crops, field crops, grain crops, are wind pollinated. So wind is actually a pollinator too, isn't it? Most of our cereal grains, field crops like that are all wind pollinated. Tomatoes are actually primarily wind pollinated. So it's kind of interesting in that situation. But even though wind is a pollinator, when we talk about pollinators, we're usually talking about the insect types. And of course, a field of corn. A field of corn is wind pollinated. So a field of corn doesn't even need insects. We can get a field of corn without. You're supposed to be laughing. I can never resist adding that in. By the way, this short program is new, hot off the press. I developed this little brief program on pollinators just for this morning. So you're the first viewers of this brief pollinator program. Now, I mentioned on some types of plants, such as squash here, you have different male and female blossoms. One way, a very interesting thing between types of plants, plants that are insect pollinated oftentimes have showy blossoms. For example, grain crops that are wind pollinated. They don't have a very showy flower, do they? But in order to attract insects, things that are insect pollinated oftentimes have the showy flowers, don't they? Which attract, they're full of nectar and colorful to attract things, insects, pollinators to them. Fascinating. Apples. Every apple that results is the work of a bee busily pollinating a flower. So every apple, or really every fruit, has seen the work of a pollinator. And apples, of course, bees have to be extra busy because bees in apples need to go from one apple cultivar to another apple cultivar. For example, you can't have two Honeycrisp trees in your yard and have fruit set, because on an apple tree, the pollen is self-incompatible. So you need two different apple trees. And luckily, within towns, you have plenty of different varieties of trees. So bees have to, in cases of apples, have to go between two different cultivars of an apple. Now let's talk about the actual pollinators. So again, when we talk about a pollinator, usually we're talking about an insect-type pollinator. One thing that has always interested me is when you talk about pollinators or look up information on pollinators, often we see butterflies and hummingbirds and things, don't we? For example, just out of curiosity, I did an internet search on pollinators. And here's one of the top photos, which is very nice. Butterflies are showy and wonderful and a very necessary part of nature, and the hummingbird is wonderful. And down in there somewhere you see some bees. Now, in our food network, even though the other things like butterflies, hummingbirds can all pollinate things and are very vital parts of nature, for our food supply, it's primarily bees that are the food supply pollinators. And this is a honeybee. If you take a close look at the body of that honeybee, look at the yellow pollen. Isn't nature fascinating in how the kind of hairy surface of a bee attracts the pollen, then when they travel on. So isn't that fascinating? That's a honeybee. And bumblebee. Now, bumblebees have a fascinating type of pollination. Remember when I said that tomato plants, tomato flowers don't actually need insects for pollination? On a tomato flower, both male and female parts are right there, and they're primarily wind pollinated. But if research has shown that if bumblebees visit tomato flowers, you have a 45% increase in fruit set, because bumblebees have a particular unique way of pollination called buzz pollination. You see, when wind pollinates things, it vibrates the flower, right? It vibrates the flower and it transfers the pollen then within the flower. Bumblebees have a natural buzz to their body, so when a bumblebee visits a tomato flower or other flower, the shaking of it accomplishes kind of what the wind, and even maybe a little more efficient. So bumblebees can even increase tomato fruit set. And there are many, many types of bees, hundreds of natural type bees. Sometimes we think, honeybees and bumblebees get kind of all the glory, but there are just hundreds of species of native little bees. And I enjoyed watching in our own vegetable garden this year and our flower garden, because I noticed all kinds of little tiny bees buzzing around. And so they maybe don't get all the glory, but actually there's probably more pollination done by some of the native type bees than there are. Okay, so we know what pollination is, we know what a pollinator needs to do, and we know the importance. So what can we do? Because, of course, we all know that pollinators have been threatened. There's a lot of things, conditions that are making bees, honeybees, native bees, that are challenging those. There's die-offs and different things, and of course that's a big concern. So what can we do? Let's take a look at some of the things that we actually can do. Now, humans and animals and pollinators and plants are actually kind of similar. As humans, we need food, clothing, and shelter, right? Kind of basic. Our pollinators, well, they don't need the clothing, but actually clothing is kind of a shelter too, isn't it? So pollinators kind of need food and shelter. So those are two things that we can help pollinators with, is the food and shelter. Let's take the shelter first. Now this is a type of an actual beehive shelter for mason bees. Mason bees are one of the types of natural native type bees. And so we could, and you can find these online in Garden Supply and other type catalogs, a little bee house for like the mason bees to give them some shelter. Another great thing that we can do is in our perennial flower beds, perennial and annual flower beds, is in the fall of the year, leave the tops on. Now, for years we've recommended that in your perennial flower bed, the flowers survive better if you leave the tops on. Instead of doing your fall cleanup, leave the tops on, and things winter better. There's a couple of things for disease prevention you should cut back. Peonies is one, and iris. But most tops in your flower bed, annual or perennial, leave on during the winter. The perennials survive better, but they've found that many of the native type bees are wintering in the hollow stems of plants such as perennial flowers. And so, about this time of winter, there are native, in the photo, that time of winter, there are native bees wintering within the hollow stems of those. See, and if we had cut those off and disposed of them in the fall, we'd be destroying their habitat. So the standard gardening practice has always been to cut the perennial tops off in early spring. And of course, you kind of have to do that before the new growth starts. Otherwise, the new growth starts and you're trying to cut off the old and it's a mess. But a question that we proposed to some of the entomologists is, okay, when we clean up our perennial gardens in the spring, at what point are those native bees still in those tops? If we cut our perennial tops back in April, before the new growth starts at the base, are we removing bees that are in there? And chances are you are. So I presented the thing, okay, what do we do? Okay, if these tops are full of bees, and but we need to cut them off for the health in the spring of the perennials. So the recommended is you go ahead and clean up, cut off the tops at the proper time, but stack them in kind of a corner of the perennial bed. Then the bees will have time to exit whenever they can, and then, you know, sometime in May, end of May, then remove the tops from the corner of your perennial bed, if you follow me. So in that way, we can provide a really good shelter for some of these. You know, and if every yard kind of does its part, you know, this can have a big impact. Now, shelter, okay, we think of homes, you know, a home for the bees, the native bees. But sheltering can also mean protecting our bees. And one way we can protect our bees is to avoid the use of some insecticides that are especially damaging. For example, on an apple tree, when an apple tree is in full bloom in May, shortly after that is a time to start spraying for apple maggot so that we don't get wormy apples. And primary insecticide that used to be used for that was the insecticide Sevin. But Sevin is very toxic to bees. So instead of that, if we choose safer, more pollinator-friendly insecticides, a good one is this type. If we looked at the active ingredient label, it says spinosad, S-P-I-N-O-S-A-D, spinosad. Spinosad has relatively low toxicity for pollinators, so we can do things such as that. Also, if we avoid the use of systemic insecticides, all the data isn't in on that yet, but a systemic insecticide, of course, is taken up by the plant and has the possibility of having insect residue in the pollen, which then, of course, affects the pollinators that are carrying that around. So the use of sheltering insects, pollinators, from some of the strong insecticides. So we got shelter. Then next is food source. Food source for our pollinators. And different types of plants have stronger attraction for pollinators. A fascinating one is borage, the herb borage, which has wonderful, wonderful flowers. And if a person wants to increase pollination, for example, in a garden, if you plant a borage plant, which are fairly easy to start from seed, and you know, the lack of pollinators isn't just something that happens in the almond orchards in California. This happens right here in town. If pollinators are scarce, we don't get as good a fruit set on cucumbers, squash, things like that. So we can really have a noticeable effect. Planting some bee magnets, such as borage, can greatly help bring those pollinators into our yards. Also, when we talk about food for pollinators, now pollinators need a supply of food spring, summer, and fall. For example, apples, crab apples, flowering crab apples are a wonderful food source early in the spring. You know, April, whenever they start blooming, April and May, wonderful early food source. Now, if you think about it too, you know, of course, butterflies are a wonderful pollinator, but they aren't around in the spring, are they? So apples and things such as that, we really need the pollinators. And fruit trees are an excellent early source, plus needed for our food. Things blooming late in the fall. You know, in summertime, there's lots of annual flowers and perennial flowers, but we should also remember to plant some things, such as a perennial dome aster. We should have some of those in our pollinator habitat so that in the fall of the year, we have things blooming for the pollinators. It's very important in the fall of the year so that they have a food source, a nectar source to build up their energy going into the winter time. All right, so what does a pollinator garden look like? Now, I brought a circular here from NDSU Beautiful Landscapes, and I put them on the table there. There's a wonderful guide towards the back, and so help yourself to those when you can. There's a wonderful guide of things that we can plant throughout the seasons to ensure that our pollinators have a food supply beginning in spring when they need it, spring, summer, and fall. So you might want to check that. So what does a pollinator garden look like? Sometimes when we think of a pollinator garden, it's similar to this. It kind of has a natural look, doesn't it? And that's certainly a wonderful type. The pollinator garden such as that, kind of a native type planting. There are challenges to this type of a planting, and one of the main challenges is weeds, isn't it? The weeds grow very similar or more vigorously than some of the plants that we actually want. There's several ways to accomplish this. We can do seed sowing, seed scattering, and then they kind of perpetuate themselves by seeding. There is another way of accomplishing that type of a planting, and that is to actually use plants instead of like seed, but actually use perennial plants and annual plants set out. And even though it looks like it's random, you kind of carefully watch that. You keep the Canada thistle out. Even though they're a pollinator, pretty soon you'd have all the thing covered with Canada thistle. So you do, even though it looks natural, you still do maintenance on it to keep it looking nice. And, looking nice, but also active. Okay, so that was one type of a pollinator garden, kind of a natural type. But equally as well is we can have even a formal. Some of our formal type gardens around cities, those work well for pollinating too, and we carefully choose the items that go into it. Now for backyard or front yard pollinator gardening, often there's a concern in our municipalities. Now in a person's front yard, if you'd like a flower bed, some people object to that, to a planting like that, don't they? I'm sure you've heard it too. They're very effective pollinators, but sometimes you can have objections that it looks unkempt, even though it's very effective at pollinating. But equally as good is perennial and annual flowers such as this. So there are different ways to accomplish pollinator gardening. And so for people that, you see what I'm following? There's kind of two ways to accomplish it. You can have kind of a natural look, or you can have a maintained look. Kind of a standard perennial flower bed like that, but you carefully choose the items that you put in to that. That is a brief overview of pollinators and pollination. May I answer any questions? Any questions that you might have? A fascinating topic, isn't it? To think that those busy little bees, how we do depend on them and take them for granted. And I'm hoping at a certain point that more of the data will be in, we hear of colony collapse on bees and they don't always know what the answer is. They suspect maybe mites or pesticides. I'm hoping that in the near future that they'll kind of, that all of a sudden we'll hear that things are a rebirth in the pollinators. Any questions that I could answer?
I guess I have a question. I do think about the bees and the chemicals. A few things, I guess. One would be like mosquito spraying and any effect on the bees with that. And then also just like people that do their own weed killer and lawn fertilizer, does that affect the bees?
A great question. Now, I would kind of like the answer myself about the mosquito spray. I'm not positive on that. Although the herbicide and fertilizer, the chemicals that are most damaging to like pollinators or to humans are things that affect living or that affect animal-like living organisms. For example, if we look at the kind of toxicity of chemicals, whether it be to pollinators or humans, insecticides are more at kind of the top of the danger scale because an insect's metabolism is more like a human than a thistle's metabolism. So the insecticides that are used are always considered more, there's more chance of having toxicity to pollinators if you're using insects. Next are the things like fungicides and then herbicides. So weed killers would have generally a lower toxicity to pollinators than would insecticides. But any of those, even human health, of course, the herbicides, those chemicals certainly do have effect. And of course, the judicious use of some things, always following label directions, of course. But like when we, and I should mention, fertilizer then, of course, would be much lower on the scale of toxicity than an herbicide. But for example, lawn weed killers, there's rarely a need to spray the entire lawn with a weed killer, because most lawns are not solid weeds. In many cases, it's a weed here, a weed there, and a weed over there. So sometimes just 10 minutes of spot spraying the 10 dandelions in your yard. So sometimes education and judicious use of some of these can greatly reduce exposure.
Do we have any idea what kind of square footage or acreage we would need within our communities to maintain a stable pollinator base?
Good question, and I've never seen any figures like that. They're probably out there. That'd be an interesting question to investigate, like how many square feet, how many pollinators are sustained by a certain number of square feet, and I'm not sure. Anything else before I wrap up?
I'm just kind of wondering if you've ever worked with the park districts, since they do manage a lot of land that's used for beautifying the city and other recreational. Have they been working towards using pollinator type plants in their plantings and things, or?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware that they have, but it would be an easy transition for them. Sometimes it's just transitioning from or to things that are known pollinator sustainers. So sometimes it's just a matter of kind of switching up some of the varieties that you're using rather than developing whole new things. Because certainly our parks, the huge number of flower beds used, could certainly be a very good potential area. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very interesting. All right, we're gonna move on to number 7 is pollinator habitat issue brief and snapshot. Kim.
I can figure this out. What do I push to? Which one? This one? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Dawn, for that great presentation on pollinators and pollinator habitats. One of the projects, a former student from Fargo-Cass Public Health, one of her student projects was to develop an issue brief and a community snapshot on pollinator habitats. And in your packet of information, it looks like this, and that's a draft, and I'm going to kind of go over a few of the highlights today. I am by no means an expert in this area, but I did want to just kind of go over a few of the things that are in there and then get your input and get any input that the audience might have as well. There are a couple of extra copies in the back too if anybody wants one of those. So how do I? Okay. So working to increase awareness on the issue and working to protect and restore pollinator habitats can make a big impact. And the document in your packet identifies a number of different resources, and one of them is the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resource Pollinator Plan. And it's an excellent resource that has 9 different action steps in there on how to maintain pollinator habitats. For example, an action step such as updating and maintaining vegetation policies, and it provides guidance on local seed and plant source selection. Another would be to incorporate pollinator habitat protection into conservation easement projects, and then also to incorporate pollinator habitats into existing turf areas and urban water quality projects. So there's a number of different ideas, a number of different steps, and then the action plan also goes into how to bring these things about. It looks something like this. One of the top actions that benefit pollinators is to protect and restore natural areas by planting trees and pollinator-friendly plants in prairie and wetland restoration. So the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resource also has a website that has a complete step-by-step guide on how to do this. So, for example, if you're going to do protection and restoration, they provide guidance on picking a site away from pesticide use, encouraging seed mixtures that have at least 15 different species, and guidance on plant selection for specific insects, and then discusses weed control and maintenance. So a couple of very good resources there. And then also, of course, NDSU and NDSU Extension has a number of resources, and then we have Dawn over here, who's an excellent resource for us. Okay. So what I wanted to kind of focus on is, or highlight, is a couple of the local initiatives, and these are all in the snapshot part of the information in your packet. But one of them is the Pollinator Garden at the Moorhead Country Club. A group of 8th grade students from Horizon Middle School, in collaboration with Concordia College, built a pollinator habitat near the 7th hole of the golf course there. And the students wanted to attract more bees and hummingbirds. And this was part of a service learning project that they did, Destination Imagination Team Project. And in addition to creating a habitat for pollinators, they also created a cute little video, and their project qualified them to compete in the national competition in Kansas this year. So it was a great success. There's also things such as cohabitation efforts with pollinator habitats incorporated into solar gardens. An example is Clay County, the Clay County Solar Gardens. Minnesota statute allows solar sites to provide natural or native perennial vegetation and forage habitats that can benefit birds and pollinators. So in January this year, 5 solar gardens were approved by the Clay County Planning Commission. And the conditional use permits that are part of that were approved to contain pollinator aspects to them. So once these are built, they're going to be providing at least 50 acres of pollinator-friendly plants. So being creative that way and using any solar garden land to have pollinators is a great way to incorporate those into the landscape. The Plains Art Museum, Buzz Lab, has paid internships for teens to promote learning and teaching and creating and advocating for pollinators. Teens partner with scientists and artists and teachers to discuss and learn about the importance of pollinators. In one of our first commission meetings, we had the Buzz Lab come and talk to us and do a presentation on their project. Public Art, St. Paul, has put up 3 sculpture sky rises that act as homes for bees, and that's one of the pictures on the bottom corner of the slide there. The goal is to promote awareness of pollinators and provide habitats in urban areas. So these are up in the urban areas in St. Paul. And then there's the Longspur Prairie Fund that works to provide positive experiences found on the native landscape of the Red River Valley through advocacy, education, and conservation. And then they work to preserve and restore native landscapes. So this Prairie Fund hosts a number of different activities, but one of them is the annual bee hunt that they hold every year, where participants can go out and find pollinators in their own habitat and take pictures of them. So the snapshot that you have in your packet has this information as well as some other different things that are happening locally in our area. There's also a number of different promotions to be aware of. World Bee Day is May 20th of every year, and the purpose is it's an international day to acknowledge the role of bees and other pollinators within our ecosystem. There is World Honeybee Day, and the next one is coming up August 15th of 2020. But it is a group of beekeepers in the U.S. that got together and petitioned the USDA to have a national day to honor bees and beekeeping. Then 12 years ago, the U.S. Senate approved the designation of a week in June as Pollinator or National Pollinator Week, which is always the third week in June, to spread the word and raise awareness about the value that bees, birds, butterflies, bats, beetles, and other pollinators have to our ecosystem. And then I mentioned the Prairie Fund and the annual bee hunt. So information on these, and there's more information, is in that snapshot. If you have any additional things that you would like to see in there or are aware of anything that's going on in your community, let us know. This is just a draft right now. So if you have any input, we'd welcome that at this time.
Any comments, questions from the board?
Well, I guess I would pose the same thing. Did they connect with the park districts locally to see, or any of the other land management offices within our jurisdictions to see if they have a policy about pollinator plantings or how they make decisions as to what to plant?
Yeah, and I think she touched on it, but also the schools, you know, are an excellent place to work with that as well, because it's an educational opportunity as well as providing a pollination system, ecosystem, so. I don't believe, well, we can't take an action on this at this time, but is it your intent to develop a blueprint for the subject? And if so, I would suggest some of that information Don presented would be excellent within here as well. And I think particularly focused on ways to create spaces that are, you know, pollinator friendly and would fall within the jurisdiction, like Mindy's talked about, the parks and stuff like that, is presenting ideas on how they can do it and why they should do it.
Yeah, what we've been doing, we have the blueprints, and then we also have the issue briefs and snapshots, but we'll take a look and make sure that these things are added in there. But the issue brief and the snapshots are meant to do the same thing as the blueprints in terms of guiding people and jurisdictions when they are interested in doing these things. So I'll take a look at those.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now we are item number 8, which is the public comment opportunity. If someone would like to speak, can speak at the podium over there. Please introduce yourself and then relay your message if there's anyone of all three of the people sitting out here that would like to speak. I guess we don't have any takers today, so we'll go on to item 9, which is just the committee roundtable. I guess any comments, questions to wrap up here? Thank you all for attending today, everyone that's here. Item 10, the action steps, as Abby touched on, was First Fridays at Theater B in Moorhead. Will be on October 4th with the subject matter geared towards food preservation. Well, it looks like we got Noel back up as well.
Sorry, I couldn't walk fast enough to catch item number 9, I guess. I actually have a few things that I wanted to mention. The first is an upcoming event. The Northern Plains Botanical Society is doing a fundraiser for their edible forest, nicely aligned with the idea of promoting pollinators and their benefits. That's happening September 28th from 2 to 5. And there will be a lot of different things happening, including some educational demonstrations. And I will actually be doing a fermented pickle demo that day. So come check it out on the afternoon of Saturday, September 28th. And then I also wanted to give a couple of shout outs. So first of all, there was a really awesome story on Minnesota Public Radio. I think it was yesterday, it might have been the day before, but it was about growing together. They did a really nice, like 3 or 4 minute piece with several interviews with Nola Storm and Jack Wood and other community members and New Americans as well. So I just encourage folks, if you missed that, it was very well done, and just great to see something like that in our community kind of lifted up in the state of Minnesota. And then the last thing, I wanted to thank all of you and the steering committee members who completed the social network analysis that was conducted by Bob Birch from NDSU. I know sometimes a lot of us get surveys all the time, right? And sometimes you never really know where that information goes. But I wanted to thank you and let you know that the steering committee has been taking a very close look at that information, and we will be using it when we are meeting with the jurisdictions and thinking about how to move forward with the implementation of our food system plan. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. And that is all that I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone else? Kim?
Yeah, I'm just gonna stand up here. I just wanted to make an announcement about the second annual Hunger and Health Summit. That's gonna be October 30th from 8:30 to 1 at Social Services. So there'll be more information coming out about that, but just something to save the date.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for November 13th. Without any other further announcements, I guess we'll just move to adjourn. Thank you very much for coming today, and we appreciate all the information that's provided by the presenters.